June the 29th, 2017. As you're looking at a graphic of the solar system now, the distances are in that very bottom line. In other words, you see where the center of Earth is under the 1. That's 1 astronomical unit. That's the distance between the Earth and the Sun, which is 93 million miles. Then you go to Mars, then you go to the asteroid belt, then you go to Jupiter, and that's what the video is about. After you go through the asteroid belt, then you have at 5.2 AU average is Jupiter. Now, when I say average, that's because as it goes around the Sun every 11.8 years, that orbit changes. And it changes from about 4.9 to about 5.4 AU. Again, that's a great distance. Look at the top. Now, it's called the Trojan asteroids. At the bottom, you have the Greek asteroids. Now, I know this is a lot of information, but the asteroid belt itself is very wide. Now, what's not to scale is the actual size of the planets, but the 1 AU through all of the astronomical unit graphs at the bottom are to scale. And so you've got the Trojans, you've got the Greek asteroids, all sharing the same path or the same orbital section around the Sun. And they're at different angles as far as the orbit. Now let's bring this particular section up just a little closer. At the bottom you have, and I've overlaid this blue square, that's what we were talking about. The orbit of Jupiter varies as it goes around the Sun. At one point it's closer. At the external point, it's further out. It varies, and that's the aphelium and the perihelion. But that blue line is where the Trojans are. Notice all the asteroids in that line, except they vary as far as they go below and above Jupiter. And at any given moment in time, and especially when you read Job, and God tells Job, you do not know about the hailstones that I have in store for that last war on the day of the Lord. But if you look at the chart on the right, you've got 1 AU, that's where Earth is, right there. You go out and then the thick asteroid belt is extremely thick, starting at about 2 AU up until about 3.5 AU. But notice from 1 to 2 AU, guys, those are the scattered asteroids that we see on space weather called near-Earth objects. But the denser area is where I think there was another planet, originally a planet 5. And as all the models have shown, that Jupiter and Saturn were pulled in to the inner solar system and possibly crushed this planet or collided with it. There was chaos within the inner solar system. Now, look at the top of this. The aphelium, or the furthest distance of Jupiter's orbit, is 5.4. The perihelium, 4.9, the closest distance. It takes 11.86 years for Jupiter to make one orbit. Just to mention, that coincides with the solar minimums, solar maximums. Nonetheless, hundreds of thousands of asteroids are currently known, and the total number ranges in the millions. Depending on the lower size cutoff, over 200 asteroids are known to be larger than 100 kilometers. And a survey in the infrared wavelengths, which you saw in that chart, has shown that the asteroid belt has 0.7 to 1.7 million asteroids with a diameter of over 1,000 meters or more. So there's no way to actually chart these because it's like looking at a giant pool table. But in the red line, that's the main asteroid belt. Notice, again, from 0 AU in the chart where the Sun is to 1 is where the Earth is. And then between Mars and Jupiter is the greatest concentration. But that thin red line, blue line, at 4 is another group, and then the Trojan group that lies within that particular Jupiter orbit that we just mentioned. Here's the big deal. Look at the top paragraph. The Euphrosynes have a gentle resonance with the orbit of Saturn, not Jupiter, Saturn. This is important. That slowly move these objects, eventually turning some of these into near-Earth objects. This is coming from Joseph Massiro, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California's lead scientist on the Euphrosyne study. The particular gravitational resonance tends to push some of the larger fragments of the Uracine family into near-Earth space. Think about that, guys. Think about that collision. Now, what would occur that would give Saturn the greatest influence? Would it be when it was lined up with the Sun and Jupiter, giving a greater magnetic pull? And if you look it back, you're dealing with that about every 20 to 30 years on an average. But Saturn has an effect. Jupiter has an effect on this asteroid belt. And guys, there's something amazing in part 2 of this video. You're not going to believe some of the information that I dug up as I was going through this. It says near-Earth objects are bodies whose orbits around the sun approach the orbit of Earth. This population is short-lived on astronomical timescales and is fed by other reservoirs of body in our solar system. That's what they're talking about. Not only Jupiter, but Saturn. As they orbit the sun, the near-Earth objects can occasionally have close approaches to Earth. For this reason alone, the safety of our planet and the study of such objects is important. And you see the government becoming more and more tuned into the fact of the threat of these asteroids. It's important to realize that as the sun goes into a solar minimum, not only is its magnetic lines of force weaker that control the heliosphere, and that creates a weaker magnetic pulse around our Earth, or magnetopause, but that allows objects like Jupiter and Saturn that have great masses, and many consider Jupiter be the binary twin of our sun, a failed gas giant. That slight orbital difference, when the sun's weak, Jupiter's strong, Saturn's behind it, lined up every so many years, and that's going to be in part 2. I've got it put into the models, that during that period, the gravitational pull on Jupiter and Saturn can affect the asteroids. Not only that, you have 66 moons around Jupiter that are part of this green line that you see called the Trojans and the Greek asteroids. And in part 2, I'm going to show you how the angle of the asteroid belt is different and its orbit, or the ecliptic, compared to the planets. And that time scale is going to reach a point to where there's a big collision between the Greeks, the Trojans, and Jupiter and its moons. And there's going to be chaos within the inner solar system. And it goes back to the book of Job, when God tells Job, do you know what I have in store for that battle of the great day of the Lord? He's talking about these large stones and hailstones from heaven. Now, guys, because we're promoting the new Patreon channel, and I have reasons that you will understand before too long, part 2 of this will be there at Patreon /BP Earthwatch. I'll put a link in it. But there's some extremely interesting information in part 2. Again, I just want to get you guys used to going to Patreon in case we get hacked again, the channel gets taken down. But don't miss part 2. It's a heads up. Be safe, which I will link, and watch it there, because you're going to see, as long as